So this is a awesome swing to demonstrate if we have like a hockey slap shot or a swing that doesn't release the club properly, what we're actually going to see. And there's two really big things that we're going to get out of this. The first is we're actually going to have an increased likelihood of shanking the ball with this type of a swing path because of the way we're gripping the ball. And we'll get into that as we come into the downswing. The second thing is this is going to be a shot shape that really pulls the ball a lot because our angle of attack is generally going to be steeper, as well as our path as we come through is going to be marked much more left and around versus something that's more on plane as we go through because we're not able to have full extension with our arms. And so what we're going to see here, if we draw a couple, now the camera angle's not the best. We're a little bit above the ball. So I'm going to try and draw these a little bit lower, just trying to make it up for it. And so what we're going to see is a takeaway where we're quite armsy. And we have a really good first position here. Our hands are, well underneath the plane and whatnot. But if we could just see kind of this one piece takeaway and able to set that wrist properly, this is fantastic. The thing, if we were on a face-on view, it's kind of hard to see from this angle, but what ends up happening is we end up having a lot of shift back onto our right leg. And if we had a face-on view, we would actually see how that our right hip kind of gets outside of our right foot. And so we kind of get into this stuck position where our hip is not bracing and allowing us to rotate through it. And so what ends up happening is we end up getting a lot of rotation through the upper part of the back. And so this can create a lot of, across the plane, but more often what happens is it's kind of this loopy, like deep inside swing that comes up to the top where all of a sudden then we're kind of like an over the top or a steep pattern because we're now trying to right the ship here. So first positional check, we're actually doing pretty good, as I said. And as we go through, we can see how, we're in a really good spot here relative to the ball where we're pretty much on plane going through. And so what ends up happening is our weight, as I said before, starts to get a little bit too far on that right side. And then all of a sudden we start to lift. And so we stop that hip rotation, but we're still trying to get the club to the top. And we end up getting to a position where we start to see the feeling of, hey, I want to complete this backswing. I need to get to the top. And so we're now going to start to see some form breakdown. The lead elbow starts to bend. Brooke Koepka has a little bit of one. Clearly, he smashes the ball, so it's not the worst thing in the world. But for an amateur golfer, just going to add some inconsistency with the swing. And the thing to see here, too, to note out is I don't know if this is on purpose or if we're just trying to hit some little chip ones, but we've choked up on the club a good 2 inches. And so what ends up happening when we have a steep angle of attack that we're trying to shallow is that the relative motion is the club is going to lengthen. It's actually going to get farther away from us. So sometimes this is I'm shanking a lot of balls. I'm going to choke up so the club's not as long. And we're going to see how we started out with a, centered, alignment as far as where we're aiming. And we're actually going to heal the ball because of that pattern. So as we get up to the top, you have a pretty shut face here, relative to our spine angle and everything else like that. We'd want to see something kind of matching a little bit more here. So we're very closed, and this is because that left wrist is so strong. This is a very, baseball or hammer swing is like Charlie Woods has one. It's one of those kind of new modern approaches where if you can get that and really have the hips rotate through, you can get things on plane, and that's exactly what this player does very well. As we start to come into the downswing, if we just take a peek at the hips, we're going to see some awesome rotation as we start to come through and some really good footwork as far as getting our weight and everything back on top of this thing here. But as we come in here, we're going to start to see if we kind of draw some plane lines where we're coming down, is that we're coming well behind the ball through several frames here, trying to shallow this thing out. And we do a great job getting there. But at a point where we're trying to now get the club in a more shallow position, we would want to see that club plane, something along those lines, something, obviously in between the two red lines would be, perfect. But if we start to have this shaft coming through the shoulder, This is something where if we're striking like an iron or a 3-wood or something like that, it's fine because we're trying to impact the ground. But in a driver, we're going to hit up on it. We're going to have a really hard time trying to elevate. And so the two things that we talked about, the first one being that wrist angle in the left hand, but also the relative lengthening of that club as we come through, is that as we come into impact here, we're going to see how in impact we do not have much much room for error there before this ball is out in right field. And so by having a correct release pattern will actually help that grip. And so it's one of those things that's going to go hand in hand. And so what you're going to see if we try and hold on, where we can see that the left wrist here is still pointing well out to the right. And so we're not having a left wrist that's rolling over or releasing. And so now we're going to get kind of this T-Rex arm. We're going to get a little bit of that chicken wing going on because we're not going to allow full extension. And so what this is going to do is it's going to take our swing path and go well to the left, which is going to produce oftentimes, like here, is we're going to see a pull of the ball. And so because that club face is shut, we're actually going to see just a dead pull. But if we had, a relative open face to that swing path, we'd see kind of this like pull cut. But the biggest thing we're going to see at the top here is how that left elbow stays into a chicken wing, but also that left wrist doesn't ever rotate forward. So we're trying to hold on, and this is a very slap shot. And so this is why sometimes this can be, that hammer swing is a hockey kind of swing because it's trying to not allow that to rotate. We're trying to basically kind of keep it square back and square through. Works for short shots, chipping and whatnot. It's not a bad technique, but especially as we get to the big stick, we need to let go of that thing in order to save our back as well as start hitting some straight shots.